Welcome to History 109, World History Since 1500, Week 1, Part 1. In all of my PowerPoint presentations, I try to abide by the copyright law, so images you see are either copyright-free Google.com images or clip art unless otherwise marked. First of all, let's start with a disclaimer. Online classes, because of their very nature, are demanding. They require a great deal of self-discipline and self-motivation. Now, in addition to that fact, this is an accelerated 8-week course. So we will literally be covering the amount of material and the amount of assignments that you would have had in a 16-week online course or even a 16-week face-to-face course. Because we are not meeting in a face-to-face format, that means that we need to leave the lines of communication open in other ways. Now, please know that I absolutely love teaching. In fact, I've won a number of teaching awards, including the rather prestigious Greater Cincinnati Consortium of Colleges and Universities Regional Award. So I am here to help you if you have any questions or concerns. Always feel free to email me at my NKU address. And it says there I check email messages every day, which is an understatement. I'm kind of compulsive about it. I probably check them 6, 10, 12 times a day, unless, of course, I'm sick. Or call my cell phone at 859-240-2143. Whether contacting me via email or cell phone, I will try to respond within 12 or 24 hours. In fact, students usually write on my evaluations that they're very impressed with the quick turnaround when I respond to their emails and so forth. Please know that I do not use text messaging as it is not a part of my cell phone contract, but I'm very available via cell phone or also by email. Now remember to go ahead and read the syllabus thoroughly. It is available on the left-hand side of the Blackboard site under syllabus. You should download it, print it, and read it. Henceforth, we're going to be calling the Blackboard site BB site for short. That's the abbreviation. On the syllabus, please note the following grade distribution. There's going to be an icebreaker where you just introduce yourself to me and to others in the class. 4 critiques, which will be essays at 100 points each for a total of 400 points. And 4 tests at 100 points each. Those will be objective online tests where you will be able to use your notes and PowerPoints and readings. You just will not be able to use one another. All of that adds up to 820 points. But actually, 800 points is a 100% in my class. So I have there my famous self-service extra credit. That is built-in extra credit. I build in extra credit to almost all of mine, not all of my classes, but this one in particular. And that means that this is out of 800, the A minus, and so forth. Now, you know that now, and I know that, but Blackboard can't quite figure it all out because it thinks that 100% in my class is 820. So there might come a point in time during the semester that you say, gee, I thought I was getting an A in this class and Blackboard is telling me that I have the equivalent of an A minus. If that happens, it could be that Blackboard simply, can't work out the math. Or maybe somebody made a mistake. Maybe I made a mistake recording something. It's always worthwhile, if you're confused about something, following through and checking with me. The student learning objectives are pretty clear that we're going to study the major people, places, and events of world history since 1500. How to think critically about readings assigned for the class. How to find scholarly resources. And how to write well-researched critique essays. So what is a critique essay? Well, sometimes it's more helpful when you define things to define what they are not. So a critique essay is not the same as an outline. It is not simply a summary of what the readings state. So it's not kind of a Cliff's Notes or Monarch Notes kind of version of things. It's that hence not an alphabet soup of facts and figures, although you might use facts and figures to support your theme and thesis of your paper. And it's certainly not an uninformed opinion. That is, you don't want to be using for my papers I, my, or me. We're going to make this very objective and very professional. And ultimately, and finally, it is not written in an hour or less after you finish your reading. Critiques require a longer time, and we'll tell you why. So what are critique essays? We know what they're not, but what are they? Well, they're thoughtful, analytical responses to the readings. If you look at that critique, you will see the word critical. The critiques will engage and build your critical thinking skills. My critique essays require at least one outside scholarly source, which you'll find on your own, and I'll show you how to do that later on in this PowerPoint lecture. And since we're using an outside source, they need an in-text footnotes. We'll discuss that more thoroughly as well. They require time. Critique essays require time to sift through and think about the readings and to conduct additional research. And finally, they're professional, not amateurish papers. An amateurish paper would tell me that you thought that the readings were interesting or boring. We're going to try to avoid these terms in our critique essays for a couple of reasons. Number one is you may find something interesting and someone else in the class might have found the readings deadly boring, and vice versa. They might have found it you might have found it boring and they find it interesting. So the readings are there because they're going to engage someone in the class. In fact, they usually engage much more than just one person. They engage a number of people. And so you may not like particularly the readings, but, stick with it. Maybe the following week you'll like the readings. We also want to avoid the terms interesting and boring because with an understanding of why I set up the critique essays the way they are. I'm very interested in getting you to build your critical thinking skills and your writing skills. And so they're designed for that purpose in mind. They're not designed as opinion essays, which, you might do for some other class, a literature class or whatever, but not for this. And so, it doesn't really matter if you found something interesting or boring, because the ultimate goal of the assignments are not to entertain you, but they are to work on critical thinking skills and writing skills. And so you might want to just see on your own time this comical Bugs Bunny clip. It basically is Bugs Bunny who, is appearing in drag, and he's doing the nails of that big giant pink monster that sometimes appears in Bugs Bunny. And he says to the monster, "Gee, you monsters must live very interesting lives, and you meet interesting people, and you do interesting things. And I wish I had an interesting life," and so on and so forth. Well, it's comical because obviously it's very superficial, and he keeps using the term interesting again and again without really saying anything. So that is, we are going to try to avoid using interesting and boring in our topics. Now, we're also going to be talking in part 2 of this week 1 lecture about the two-way street of history. And since we're going to be doing that later, I'll let you mull over that and we'll be patient and wait for that to happen. But critical thinking means that we're utilizing our human reasoning skills to arrive at well-researched analytical conclusions. So on 4 of the 8 weeks, you'll be assigned readings on both sides of an issue. And I chose readings so that you see the wide breadth of documented opinions here. Some people are going to be for something, some people are going to be against something, kind of yes and no. There may even be some weeks where you see 3 readings, so maybe somebody's for something, somebody's against, somebody's sort of in between, or 2 people are for, etc. And the purpose of those both sides readings are to get you to think critically, to research further, and to write analytically. The purpose is not to solve age-old historical controversies, which of course neither you nor I can achieve in a 750-word critique. So don't get worried about or obsessed with, hung up with, well, he wants me to decide what the answer to this really is. Again, we're not here to decide what the answer really is. We're here to expose you to different viewpoints and to let you kind of ruminate about those and write about those and do some further research. So don't worry about solving all of the world's age-old historical problems. You'll be assigned readings on both sides, but before you do those, you should download and listen to my weekly lecture. That will provide a background for you, a foundation for you, so that you will better understand those both sides readings. If you start with a both sides reading and you don't do the weekly lecture first, and you don't read from Jeffrey Blamey's A Short History of the World first, it's going to be much more difficult. So do these two things first to give you the foundation or background you need. By the way, students have really loved Jeffrey Blamey's A Short History of the World. It's very entertaining to read. And notice I didn't say interesting. It is very entertaining to read, but it's also very well documented, and it's more thematic. It's not just one fact after another. It looks at the larger themes to things. And I also chose it because it's very inexpensive, and I don't believe in getting $150, $200 textbooks for classes. I think that's unreasonable to expect students to pay those kinds of prices. So it's a very affordable textbook. Well, we're going to use a rubric, and you see the rubric right here, and you have it also in your syllabus, so you know what you need to do to write just a wonderful critique essays. And I say these are 7 steps to a great critique essay, where the letters of critique actually form an easy memory device, mnemonic of 7 steps. So what are we going to do with our critiques? And how are we going to build critical thinking skills? Number 1, C, we're going to compare and contrast the both sides readings. Now, obviously, as any professor, I have to know that you read the both sides readings. So I need to see some evidence of that in your critique essays. And you provide evidence by kind of comparing and contrasting them. Even though they may be different views, even people who disagree with one another can usually have some similarities between them. So the first thing we want to do is, are there any similarities? We want to compare. Compare means to find similarities. Contrast, that means to find differences. And those, of course, will appear much more readily to you from the both sides reading. And then that shows me that you've read them and that you're thinking critically about the readings. R, we want to relate to the time period using the Blaney book and my lectures. So you might read some of these things and say, gosh, they're talking about topics that happened in world history 400 or 500 years ago. I mean, that was hundreds of years ago. You may say to yourself, I can't relate to that event. And that's all right, because we live in the 21st century, and it's going to be kind of difficult sometime to learn how people in 1500 or 1600 or 1700 thought, because they really did kind of do things differently than we do. But what I'm inviting you to do, and what historians always invite you to do with history classes, is to kind of just put aside your cultural baggage from the 21st century and to try to relate it to the time period. Why did they think that way? Why did they act that way? How were they different from us? And how may it had made sense to them while it doesn't maybe readily make sense to us? And my lectures and the Blaney book will help set the stage for you to relate the both sides readings to the time period. The essay, I, so C-R, I want you, as I said, to investigate other sources, that you find and explain what you learn from at least one outside scholarly source. Now, notice I say find and explain. So it's not sufficient enough to go just find an outside source and to put it in your bibliography. You have to convince me that you read the outside source, you understood it, and you can analyze it and bring it into your essays. Okay? And please know that for this class, the scholarly sources do not include Wikipedia, Encarta, or Britannica, or websites. No websites. Okay, Because you're looking for that other source, I've got to know what that source is. So you have to provide at least one footnote. I want everybody to learn, or we're also going to use in-text notes, and a bibliography, and I'm going to show you how to do that and correctly cite it so that you do the source, you let me know what the source was, and then you get credit for that. Okay, CRITI. I want you to tease apart these both sides readings and your outside source using impartiality. That is objectivity. And isn't that really what we do in all of our careers, in all of our college courses? Whether we're taking a science course, a nursing course, or any, mathematics course, we want to look at things as objectively as possible. In fact, if you would go to your doctor, your physician, and there's something wrong with you, and you just walked into his office, you would want him to do all the objective sorts of tests that he could do, blood tests, MRIs, whatever he needed to do, so that he could find the answer. And you would be, sincerely offended if you walked in and say you were me and, you were in one of your phases where you did the beard kind of looked a little scruffy, and he looks at me and says, I bet this guy doesn't take care of himself, and I bet he doesn't eat right, and who knows, maybe he looks like a drug addict, blah, blah, blah. And he makes a bunch of subjective things, right? And I end up not getting the proper diagnosis. So the same thing applies to all of us. We want to make the proper diagnosis of our readings. We want to analyze them. We don't want to be opinionated about them. We want to find the truth. And that means formulating some questions. So you may be reading through these both sides readings, and you might be reading through your outside scholarly source, and you say, well, I do have this particular question that none of these authors is really talking about. Well, mention that. Put that in your essay. That shows that, you're thinking outside the box. You're thinking more deeply. And you're probably also going to uncover what these authors, including your outside source, might have left out or glossed over. And maybe they had a reason why they left it out. Maybe it just doesn't support the way they feel. So see, you're deepening in this third column, you're deepening your critical thinking skills. Then in the fourth column, we're just doing basic editing. We want to see a nice edit, a nice essay that is proper and college level and not sloppy. So first of all, the essay needs to be about 750 words. Shouldn't be a problem. All word processing programs like Word give you the number of words. The essay needs to have a theme or themes that evidence critical thinking skills. Again, it is not merely a summary of the readings. I'm going to give you an example of that here in a minute. We also have a model essay for you to look at on the website. The essay should contain an introduction, body, and conclusion, all utilizing paragraphs with topic sentences, and the essay should be professionally written with proper grammar, correct spelling, and punctuation. Again, appropriate voicing. Please do not use things like I, my, me. And there are always ways to get around using not I, my, me. You might you might get this, I'll write a sentence that says, from the readings this week, I feel that. Just leave the I feel that out. Just say, from the readings this week, it is obvious that the authors blah, blah, blah. So you don't really need I, my, and me in historical professional essays. Now, by the way, if you need any help with any of this, I'm available. We all improve our writing skills by going to someone else and learning from someone else. So if you're not certain and you want to send a rough draft to me, as an email attachment and say, I know this isn't due by safe assignment until, 3-4 days from now, but I'd like your opinion, I'd be more than happy to read it for you and to correct certain things. Feel free to let Microsoft Word do some of your work too. It should be able to find misspelled words for you. It will even underline, usually in green, things that are not grammatically correct. Feel free to take it to the Writing Center at NKU, or to a favorite teacher or professor, to someone who you know is really good with writing, because we learn from one another, and that's how we advance in our writing skills. Critique essay. So let's examine again that theme just a little bit more. What do we mean an essay has a theme or themes that evidence critical thinking skills? It's not merely a summary of the readings. Well, let's imagine that you would have had an essay on this first week, the Protestant Reformation. Now, you don't. You have a test on this material this first week. But let's suppose that you did. And you would want to maybe write an essay that says, from our readings, based upon our readings, it is obvious that the Protestant Reformation was more than simply a religious reformation. It also resulted in the reformation of politics and economics in Western Europe. It, in other words, helped to build the world we now know today. That is a theme or a thesis. That is a big idea, a larger idea, that is more than just a litany of names, places, people, and events that form the Protestant Reformation. It describes partly what, say, some of the authors were saying about the Reformation. It deepens it, and it looks at the bigger picture. Now, you would say that in an introductory paragraph. That's your theme. That's your thesis. Then in the body of your paper, you would give some detailed information supporting your thesis. So you might say, for instance, well, the princes of the Holy Roman Empire, that is what we now call Germany, certainly saw an opportunity in Martin Luther's theology to kind of go against the hierarchical church of the time, the Pope in Rome, and to express themselves and to kind of carve out for themselves a more independent kingdoms and principalities. And then you might say, and the peasants, on the other hand, took some of Martin Luther's theology and interpreted it in their own manner and thought that he was calling for rebellion. And then the princes, on the other hand, said, no, rebellion is not in Martin Luther's theology, and so on and so forth. See, so what you've done is you have a major theme or themes, and then you're supporting it with evidence. And sometimes that evidence is going to be kind of sub-themes, and sometimes it will be names and dates and places. But it doesn't mean that you're trying to write the whole history of the Protestant Reformation. You're just looking at one little part of it, because after all, in 750 words, that's all about you can do. Then in a conclusion, you would give a full paragraph and essentially restate your theme, and in a very short, succinct manner, tell me how that you did that. Critique essays and tests are due on the Mondays following by 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before midnight. If for some reason you have something that happens in your life, please email me and let me know that they're going to be late. By the way, you're always welcome to work ahead. And now we're going to go into a lesson on how do you find scholarly sources suitable for the critiques. Well, where do we go for an additional source? What's trustworthy? Again, for the sake of being repetitive, and I'm sorry if I am repetitive, let's avoid radioactive resources. What I call radioactive resources for this class are internet websites, including Wikipedia, Britannica, and all those kinds of things. Instead, we're going to rely upon standard scholarly resources, including the many digital resources of NKU's Steely Library, literally thousands of possibilities for you that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'll show you how. Now, you might say, as you're going through this, well, how do I come up with these themes, and how do I find scholarly sources, outside scholarly sources to support those themes. Well, first of all, remember, you're going to listen to the lecture. So you're going to start getting some ideas for themes are going to start popping out of your mind from the lectures. And then when you read the Blaney book, Short History of the World, some other themes are going to start popping out at you. And then when you read the both sides readings, even more themes will pop out at you. So, take some notes as you're reading, however you're most comfortable doing that, highlighting, underlining, I don't know, taking notes on the side. Take some notes and start to build up your kind of vocabulary. We use the example of the Protestant Reformation. And so you're building up your vocabulary of people and places and themes in the Protestant Reformation. Now you go to the Steely Library databases, and most of those will require you to log in. And your login is the same as your NKU username and password. It's that easy. In the upper right-hand corner, when you get to nku.edu, you'll see this drop-down list, and one of the things is Library Steely. Go there. And you might start, and there are plenty of places to start here, but you might want to start with Research Help. And under Research Help, you'll see all kinds of things. You'll see research guides, tutorials, ref works. These are all things that you can look over yourself and play around with. Let's try research guides. And here you see, you can go to reference items, books and media, articles, websites. So there are a lot of different options. We're going to go just under reference items tabs to Credo reference ebooks. And here you're going to find very specialized reference books, the Encyclopedia of World History and other things. And these are okay to use. These are specialized encyclopedias. Now, some classes don't want you to use specialized encyclopedias. I'm fine with specialized encyclopedias. I just don't want you using Britannica and Wikipedia and those which are general encyclopedias, as opposed to specialized encyclopedias. There's also some humanities ebooks, and some students like this especially because they can download an entire ebook and look it over, and you might say, well, I don't have time to read an entire book. Nobody's asking you to read the whole book, but you might find a chapter in that book, say, for instance, on the Protestant Reformation, that would be very helpful. And reading a chapter is like reading an article in a scholarly journal. It's about the same length, and so that might be one option that you use. Now, there's a dozen ways to find what you need on these websites. They're really designed to kind of be repetitive in many respects, so that, if you try this way, you should be able to find it, and you might find it, 3-4 other ways as well. One of the ways that you might find some of the articles you need is to look under journals, A through Z. And there's alphabetical list of all the different journal title names. So if you know, hey, I would like to look at the Journal of World History, or I would like to look at the American Historical Review, or if you're familiar with the journal, you could do that. But if you're not familiar with history journals, and odds are that most of you are not, you could just type JSTOR, because JSTOR is kind of the vehicle that takes a lot of these journals, indexes them for history, gives abstracts, and it's a good place to start. And JSTOR has some different things. They have a test drive search. Let's try something on the Habsburg dynasty of what was Germany and Austria, what they used to call the Holy Roman Empire. So in this case, I typed in Habsburg dynasty. It doesn't matter whether it's not sensitive to capital letters. Small letters are okay. I put only content that I can access. I changed the years of articles from 1990 to 2013. You don't have to do that. If you find an article from 1950 or 60, if it's on something that's 450 to 500 years old in this class, sometimes those articles are timeless. There are many articles from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s that still can be very valuable. I click Scholarly Articles, History, and Search, And lo and behold, I found 2,216 items. Now, in this case, you don't want to look for book reviews. You want to look for absolute articles. And when you click on something, it will come up over here. An abstract will come up over here and tell you what you're looking at and tell you a little bit about it. And if you like what it says, then you can go and hit the PDF and the article will download for you. And voila, you'll find the bibliographic citation right here on the front. And you need that for your bibliography. So, as I say, how cool is that? Now, if you didn't want to go under Journals A to Z, you could go through the Databases tab. And there's a treasure trove of digital full-text articles there accessible. And these are kind of the main history storage, digital storage vehicles. JSTOR, Academic Search Premier, and Project Muse, just to name a few. So experiment with these yourself. There's the JSTOR Scholarly Journal Archive database. And you might even say, well, you know, I wouldn't mind reading a chapter in a book, but maybe you don't want an ebook. Maybe you'd like to get it out of a library locally. Maybe you don't even live locally. Maybe you live someplace outside of the city, and as many people do when they're taking an online class. Say, for instance, you live in New York City and you say, I just want to go ahead and find a book at any one of the branches of the New York Public Library on the Protestant Reformation. Well, an easy way to do that is to go to WorldCat. And WorldCat literally means World Catalog, and it ties catalogs, library catalogs in literally worldwide. It is amazing. And if you can't find the book at your neighborhood library, and if you're at NKU and really want them to get the book in for you, they'll send for it. Obviously, for this class, we've got an 8-week class. Probably not a good idea for this class. But I mentioned this for other classes that you might take that would be 16 weeks, or if you're ever doing a practicum or anything else. And so you can read over the WorldCat and how that works and the results, and how SourceFinder works, when they get in books for you through the library. So if you prefer real books, and some people say this could be me with my little sneakers on and my glasses and heading towards with all my books laden down to my local library. Now, since there are literally thousands of articles and sources for you to choose, please choose in such a fashion that you do the work yourself. And while you can be helpful collegial to your classmates, don't share your sources with them. The last thing that any professor wants to see in a class like this is, 5 or 6 friends all kind of doing the work together and using the same source. You don't want to do that. You want to do your own work. So please do not share your sources or ideas for sources with others. If you need help, further help in finding sources, please contact me. That's the best way to go. And so let's say you want to learn all about Christopher Columbus and you want to know how this whole model essay stuff works. Well, on the class site under week 1, you'll find a model essay, both sides articles for Columbus. And what I've done is I've taken that and I've written for you a sample critique. And if the only thing you do is open up that model and read my critique to give you an idea of what a model critique would look like, there's one example. So students have found this to be very, very helpful in the past. So I would suggest looking it over just to get an idea of what a critique looks like. Every class we're really required to talk about plagiarism. Plagiarism is something that you want to avoid because it can result in this class in an automatic 0 for an assignment. And some classes, you commit plagiarism, they'll give you an F for the entire class. We are required by federal laws and also rules and regulations at NKU to report every case of plagiarism up the line. So I would have to report it to my chair, and they would have to report it to the dean, and so on and so forth. So you don't ever really want these things to get on your permanent record. So let's learn what they are, what they constitute, and how to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is quoting or using wording from a book, journal article, internet, or other source verbatim. That is word for word, without putting the quote in quotation marks and citing it in a footnote. And so we'll show you how to quote things properly and to avoid plagiarism. Sometimes, occasionally, usually once a semester, a student will go out to an internet site and they'll say, you know, I really don't have time to do this assignment, and I'm going to cut and paste some things for an internet site, and Dr. Tenkate won't know the difference. Please do know that we do know the difference, because all of our tools here at the university are rather sophisticated technologically, so every paper you send in through Safe Assignment is being checked against literally thousands, if not in some cases millions of sources, and it will quote chapter and verse of where you got it on the internet or where you got it out of a book. So and it's pretty darn thorough. So if don't even try this, please. Paraphrasing another person's unique ideas, thesis, themes, etc., without giving them credit. You know, so if all of a sudden you would start talking about if you were doing a science paper and would start talking about adult stem cell research, and I discovered, you know, this and that, or made it seem like you discovered it and you didn't discover it, that's obviously plagiarism. It's stealing someone's thoughts, someone's research. Using another person's tables, graphs, photographs, artwork, illustrations. If you do that, you have to cite them. You have to let people know where they come from. Using any or all, using all or part of another student's paper or presentation, even if that student approves. Using a paper that you've purchased or one that's free from an essay or presentation website or program. Now, avoiding plagiarism. Plagiarism is easy to avoid because if you quote something word for word, like I'm showing here, then you need to put it in quotation marks. Those quotation marks say to the reader, to me, this is not my wording. I am quoting verbatim, word for word from a source. And I'm letting you know that. And I'm footnoting it, and I'm letting you and the whole world know that this is where I got the information from. Just a little footnote to our footnote. These ellipses, they're called ellipses, ... means that there was more in that sentence, but I chose not to include it because it wasn't really necessary to my argument. Now, if you would decide to use a really long quote, like this entire paragraph, you would have to do something even a little more sophisticated, and that is a block quotation. The reason why we use block quotations in professional papers, like in history, is it tells people I am quoting a whole long piece. You know, tighten your belt. Get ready, because I'm quoting a big, long quote. And part of it is to kind of say, it's not my words, and to keep people from just cutting and pasting big, long quotes and putting them all together and saying my paper's done. Well, that's not a paper, right? Because it's just a bunch of cut and paste of big, long quotes. So if you would do a big, long quote like this, unlike what you saw here, you would actually do what's called a block quotation. So I'm going along, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm into the word for word. I've put it in single space. I've indented it, and I have footnoted it. And that tells everyone this is not my writing. If I would paraphrase not generally known facts or statistics, I would also need a footnote. So what I've taken here is I've reworded this in my own words, but I'm still footnoting it because, you know, otherwise somebody might read this and say, Dr. Tenkate, did you just make this up? Did you dream this up last night? Where did you get this information from? People don't walk down the street and just off the top of their head know this kind of stuff. You might say that Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory might know it because he has an eidetic memory, but then he would remember where he got it from, right? And by the way, in my 28 years of teaching, I can tell you this. I have never have never met one professor or one student who were Sheldon, who had an eidetic memory. It is a very, very unusual thing. I've met people with very good memories, but no one with an eidetic memory. They're very rare. Now, you needn't get obsessive about worrying about what you quote and don't quote. If you're just talking about generally known facts like any of these things here I've listed, you know, they're widely known. You can find them in thousands and thousands of books. They're nothing that is a surprise to any of us. Obviously, you would not have to footnote such things. If you would use a graph, you know, if you're ever giving a presentation and, you know, or you want to use a graph or a photo for your critique essays, you need to cite it. You need to give a source. You need to let us know where you got it from. And remember, we said every critique essay needs at least one footnote. So let's just do the terminology first and get that out of the way. A footnote appears at the bottom or foot of a page, hence its name. An endnote appears at the end of a paper, hence its name. For this class, you can use footnotes if you like footnotes. You can use endnotes if you like endnotes, or you can even use in-text footnotes, which I'll show you here in a minute. It doesn't matter to me, but you have to have at least one of them per paper. An in-text footnote or an in-text note would look like this. Instead of having a little superscript and a number, which would take you to the foot or the end of the page, the foot of the page or the end of the paper, you have something like this. The last name of the author, the year of publication, comma, and the page number, and close the parentheses and period. Now, I'll know all the other information I need to know because all the other information, like the name of the title of the work, etc., will be in your bibliography, which is different from a footnote. So what is a bibliography? Bibliography is a list of your sources used given at the end of your paper. It includes important information like an author's first and last names, the title of the book or title of the article, the place of publication, the publisher, the date of publication, page numbers, etc. Bibliographies go by the last name of the author alphabetically. And then I even give and I show you how Jane Doe would come before John Doe because obviously Doe, Doe, Doe are all going to line up. So then we go to the first name. And J.A. comes before J.O. Well, now you have two by John Doe. Which one comes first? Well, now you have to go to the next part. And so we're going to go to the title. M comes before T. And then I show you some other examples. Obviously, D comes before M, and this one doesn't have an author to it, so we just have to go to the title and put it in place right there, because P comes after M. A bibliographic citation for books or authors should be done in this fashion. I need to always see the last name of the author, the first name of the author, the title of book. Titles of books are italicized. Place of publication, publisher, and date of publication. A scholarly journal, the same thing. You need the author's last name, the author's first name, the title of the article, which note is put in quotation marks. The name of the journal, which note is put in italics. The volume number of the journal, issue number, like if there's a spring or May or whatever it says here, and the year. And in this case, the page numbers of the entire article. Okay, then I show you for a popular magazine, a newspaper article with no author given. When in doubt, if you are unsure how to cite a source, either a footnote or a bibliographic citation, please feel free to ask me. And a great reference is a Chicago Manual of Style, which is preferred by historians. And that's all you have to do is Google Chicago Manual of Style, and there's many different examples on the internet of how to write things in a bibliographic citation, footnote citation properly in the Chicago Manual. Now, the one other thing that I want to talk a little bit about is grammar. And, you know, we did ask you to use proper grammar. So in your free time, if you want, get a hold of a book like English Grammar for Dummies, or maybe you've got your book from English 101 still. But you might want to look over some things like, I love this book, English Grammar for Dummies, and they'll talk about things like making subjects and verbs agree, prepositions, when to use quotation marks. You use quotation marks for the titles of poems, stories, essays, songs, and magazine or newspaper articles, but you use italics for titles of books, CDs, DVDs, magazines, newspaper, television shows, and plays. This is pretty important. This is a big one. Students are always saying, I would have, I could have, I should have. Those don't exist. The correct expression is would have, could have, should have. And some different things, misplaced modifier, some of these are pretty comical. Apostrophes, this is another big one that students always make mistakes on, you know. Things like possession and the use of apostrophes. We also use apostrophes with contractions, and this gives some of the popular contractions. So that is what we need to cover for week 1, part 1. It's going to be continued in week 1, part 2. Hope you have a good day. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.